Let's now bring into this discussion right away Pulse Asia Research President Ronald Holmes. Welcome back to Storycon. Ronald, we just spoke to you a few days, pero ito nga, we have another big news on our hands.
Good afternoon, Ami, Reg, and Ed. Wala pa yung heckler.
Wala pa sir eh.
Wala pa yung habol siya. Pero wait, before...
Nagtatap yung heckler kasi hindi mo raw tinimbre sa amin to last week.
That's true, no? Last week, a few days lang ago, kinausap natin.
Joke lang.
But again, let's talk about the provenance first and foremost. Sino yung nag-commission ito? May nag-commission ba ng survey na to? And if not, tell us about how you conducted the survey. Because of course, there's always questions around yung provision of any kind of survey. So talk us through that first.
Yeah, so this is the same survey we've been conducting since 1999. It's a quarterly survey. We call it Ulat ng Bayan. We follow a multi-stage probability sampling, so random selection of cities, municipalities, then the barangays, the sample spot, and eventually the respondent in the household. These are face-to-face interviews, and there are 2,400 respondents across the nation.
Okay, so may nag-commission po?
None.
Okay.
It's our own quarterly survey, regularly conducted since 1999.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay, sir.
Professor, yung tanong namin, medyo significant yung pagbagsak ng numbers ni President Marcos. And of course, inevitably, ang tanong ng mga tao, kasi nangyari to during that time na pinadala around the time, no, after na, there was a lot of complaints from the other side na yun na nga, pinadala daw, kinidnap daw si President Duterte. And related ba yung issue yun dito? Kasi nakita namin, we have another survey showing na ang mga disapproval over gut issues inflation, jobs, di ba? Poverty, and of course nadagdag yung corruption. May relation kaya dyan yung kasi umakyat din naman yung ratings ni VP Sara na at around the time also meron ding controversy over impeachment. May impact ba yun dyan?
Yeah, may impact definitely, may yung mga kaganapan, the events that transpired prior to the survey. The chief is the arrest of the former president and his swift dispatch to the Hague. So definitely that has an impact in terms of yung approval and trust ratings of both the president and the vice president. And then additionally, as you mentioned, yung appreciation of the national administration's performance in addressing the most urgent concerns. We have been tracking this for the last 25 years. And, it's under this administration that we saw for the first time, I think it was still September 2023, when disapproval in terms of the attending to high prices of commodities hit about 70%. So since September 2023, nasa 73 na ang disapproving. So yung 79 na nakikita mo ngayon, basically it continues from what we had registered almost 2 years ago. So in a sense, there's really declining appreciation of the national administration, and eventually who will be held accountable for the performance of the national administration? The buck stops with the president, right? Now, how do we explain Sara Duterte's increase? There's a 7 percentage point increase in terms of approval, and there's, I think, a 8% percentage point increase in terms of trust. One is that I don't think she's being held accountable for the national administration's performance because she has dissociated herself from the administration since last year. The second one is that, the delay in the impeachment case basically relieved her of any responsibility to address all of the concerns and issues raised against her in the prior months. In a sense, the delayed trial of the impeachment case helped her. At the same time, how they framed the arrest of the former president as a kidnapping, a narrative that we know has been reported even by Reuters, massive disinformation. That would have really also changed the perception of the public with regard to the value of the arrest of the former president.
But I also noticed, sir, yung dun sa most urgent national concerns ninyo, these are basically policy and economic issues. Wala namang sa urgent national concerns, wala namang issues that have to do, for example, with the ICC or with impeachment and all that. Of course, I don't know how one would put it here. Pero yun nga so I suppose talaga hindi siya magre-reflect dito sa urgent concerns at magre-reflect lang dito, for example, would be something like inflation.
But there are two governance issues, Ed. No? Yung governance issue na nag-top 5 since last February will be fighting criminality
Yes, sir.
and fighting graft and corruption, which Ami pointed out. No? Yung fighting criminality was not in the top 5 in the December survey. It rose to the top 5 in February, and we see it also as a concern about 1 out of 3 Filipinos. Whether this is an indication of, how the narrative of the Dutertes again, that, crime is back, peace and order conditions have worsened compared to their administration. We can take it as such, partly, and it might be a perception. That's why recently the Philippine National Police and the Presidential Communications Office said, for example, one kidnapping. That's not really make it appear that the peace and order condition has deteriorated. So, yes, the ICC issue is not one of the concerns because this is a time series. No, we
Yes, sir.
basically cover the same concerns across our surveys. Hiwalay yung ICC. Unfortunately, that is not one of the concerns that we
That
assess the
captured.
national administration on.
Yeah. So that's what I was also wondering. How do we reconcile this with the other survey that said majority of Filipinos want Duterte held accountable for the killings during the war on drugs? 60, of course, it's a different survey, I know. Pero parang doesn't this go against that finding? Or hindi?
Reg, I would not say. I mean, one is that I don't know what the methodology of the survey is, but granting that that's the sentiment on the part of the public, to be held accountable does not contradict this the data that we get here, because accountability means basically allowing the president to answer for the charges that have been leveled against
not
him.
necessarily ICC.
And to afford him the right to due process. And the tale that is being woven and spun by the Duterte camp is that he has been denied due process. So in a sense, whatever has an impact on the public opinion may actually have percolated across the time from the time of the arrest. So the accountability is there. I think I would assume, and I hope it is true, and I would agree with that particular perspective, that anyone who has been charged of crimes against humanity should be held accountable, should be afforded due process. And I would go with that 61%. But the way that it is being characterized by the Duterte camp, kidnapping yan It's such an extrajudicial rendition, which actually, legally speaking, is not the case. And I'm not a learned individual. No?
That word again.
Kaya isa pang tanong ko, Professor, dahil ang laki nga ng binagsak ng numbers ng mga administration officials, anong impact kaya niyan? Will it have an impact on the midterm elections, yung resulta?
Well, meron siguro, but I would take the midterm elections separately, because the thing with regard to the midterm elections is that you have basically more than 60 people, 11 in the alliance, 10 in the PDP and their guest candidates, and then you have a number of independents, you have people from Bayan Muna. So they are campaigning on their own. And you've seen already people voting out and doing their own separate campaigns. So in a sense, they're selling themselves independent of how the public would perceive the administration. Ang hindi natin nakikita, and which the survey would not be able to measure, would be the machineries that both administration and any party for that matter will be using and operating leading up to the elections and on election day. Will the government pour its resources, continue to pour its resources to convince people to elect members of the alliance? On the other hand, would the other alliances, the Duterte and the independents, have the resources also to go across the country, talk to local politicians, secure the support of local politicians, make sure that the local politicians would carry them and that they would be able to command votes on the part of their constituency? That machinery is something that we will see operating, as I said, leading up to the elections and probably up to election day.
Sir, sa income levels naman, I'm looking at the income level numbers. Of course, we have A, B, C, D, and E. Ang pinakamalaking bagsak ni BBM is sa Class D, down by 18 percentage points. Ang pinakamalaki niyang pag-akyat ng disapproval rating is also from income D, 23 percentage points. What do you think is the reason for that? Inflation pa rin?
Well, and that's the largest socioeconomic class.
Okay.
Based on our estimation, that's about 75% of the total population. So, kaya wherever Class D goes, that's what you will see at the national level. So, kaya makikita mo, Ed, no, na pag bumaba siya ng 18 points sa Class D, ay bababa siya ng halos kaparehong puntos doon sa pambansang level, no, o antas.
Okay.
So, maraming dahilan dyan, kasama na yung mataas na presyo ng mga bilihin. Prior to the survey, the Philippine Statistics Authority, if I'm not mistaken, mentioned that we hit the highest unemployment rate in the previous month. Nag-ease yung inflation, pero hindi ibig sabihin pag nag-ease yung inflation, bumaba ang presyo ng mga bilihin, di ba? Ibig sabihin na bumagal lang
ang pag-akyat.
pero nandun pa rin siya, di ba? Nagtakda ang gobyerno na 45 pesos na ang maximum retail price ng bigas. Pero 45 pesos pa rin. No? Malayo pa rin no, sa pinangakong 20 piso.
Sir, sa island groups naman, I'm looking at VP's disapproval rating sa Mindanao, 1%. Have you ever seen anybody with that kind of disapproval rating? Ganyan kababa?
And it's quite surprising actually. Well, it's not surprising. It's really something that we have not seen in the past. But especially when we were discussing the senatorial preferences last time, when I tried to when we broke down the senatorial preference, we saw that in Region 11, the top 10 candidates were all from PDP.
11 is
That's a
11 ba is double
region.
area? Okay,
double region. So that means na ganun kalakas ang hold nila in Mindanao. As I mentioned then, na-activate yung kanilang supporters . So in a sense, that's the effect of the arrest. The arrest and how they characterize the arrest as something that is a kidnapping, as a violation of due process. Suddenly, they became human rights advocates. Has struck a chord on the part of their supporters, and their supporters are now basically expressing or re-articulating their support for the Dutertes and those who are associated with them.
And their approval rating even now is at 96%.
Yep, and and that's where you see decline in terms of where the president has a single-digit trust rating. Also,
5%.
Put it into context for us, no? Kasi itong latest survey that you guys released, it only compares it with the February survey. But help us put Marcos's approval ratings into context. May nakita na po kayo ganito kababa for a president halfway through his term? Because it's pretty low at 25% approval ratings.
Dapat ang tinatanong natin dyan si Ami at si Ed kasi mas na-observe na nila.
Kaya nga nabanggit ko na kanina, di ba, Professor?
Si GMA, si GMA midterm 2007 had a decline, less than majority approval, less than majority trust. But the difference between GMA and BBM now, closer to the midterms, is that GMA had lower majority approval and trust, but her disapproval and distrust rating were not majority.
No, that's what I mean. So nakita ka na ng ganitong numbers during GMA's time, but was it as low as 25%? And then the other context.
Yep. Yes.
I think si GMA went below zero, no?
Hindi, if you net, it was negative, but we don't net because may undecided. May undecided kasi Ami so hindi namin ninet. Pero ang pinamababa ni GMA, kung di ko nagkakamali, was closer to the end of her term, parang 10 lang ang approval niya. Pero kung midterm ang pag-uusapan, ay halos pareho na itong kay Bongbong na 25. Pero ang kaibahan nga, yung disapproval at distrust, parang nahati yung publiko ng midterm ni GMA . One out of four are, approving or trusting, karamihan ay undecided at meron kang isa sa tatlo na disapproving and distrusting. Kay BBM, lumalabas kayo na mayorya ang hindi nag-aaproba at mayorya ang hindi nagtitiwala.
Pero Professor, normal yung ano, di ba? Kasi you've been tracking, you've been conducting this survey since several administrations na eh. Talagang pag midterms, di ba? Talagang medyo bumabagsak yung administration eh. And sometimes, well, more often than not, nagre-recover. Yun yung
Yeah.
natatandaan kong trend eh. Tama ba yun? Yun na natatandaan kong trend sa mga presidente natin eh.
Hindi siya
Babagsak siya ng midterm, tapos yung iba bumabalik, yung iba hindi naman.
hindi siya gaanong bumubulusok. Bumababa siya marginally. Pero tama ka, Ami, bumabalik. Kunyari kung ikukumpara natin
Yes.
kay the late Pinoy and even
Yes.
kay Digong,
Even
bumaba,
Digong,
pero,
yes.
but it was marginal. It was not that
Hindi
high.
ganyan kalaki. So hindi
and-
ganyan kalaki.
And they were scoring, I think Pinoy was about close to 70 midterm.
Oh, consistent siya, consistent siya.
And Digong was about close to 80. I cannot recall the figures, but I think that simply suggests that even if there was a dip in their rating, at midterm, people were still appreciative of their work and still trusting of those presidents, which is again differentiates BBM and GMA during their midterm.
Pero in this case, you're saying, nag-combine ngayon yung disaffection nung yung mga kritiko ng administration with their dissatisfaction with the way the government is handling gut issues. So nagkasama siya.
Sana
Ayan.
na ganun na, nag-snowball na eh. Tapos nandagdagan pa ng political turbulence. So, and that political turbulence definitely doesn't in any way help addressing, because government's attention would be directed towards something else.
Political
Right?
turbulence.
So
I like it.
it becomes, to a certain extent, the patronage is there in order to
Yes.
try to assuage people na may ginagawa kami. Pero hindi yun yung makabuluhan eh. Hindi yun yung masustansya, substantive
Yung hinahanap ng tao.
response sa ganito mga problema.
Sir, may phone-in question kami from one of our producers, si Paul Padua. Okay, ito ang tanong niya. Pwede ba mag-phone in? Hindi yun. Paanong mataas ang satisfaction rating matagal nang hindi nagpe-perform ng function si VP Sara? Wala namang susukatin. Ano yung tanong? Are you satisfied with the performance and what performance?
Ang tanong rito ay kung sila talagang aprobado, hindi masabi ko aprobado o hindi aprobado. Hindi aprobado o lubusang hindi aprobado sa pagganap ng tungkulin ng Vice Presidente. Ngayon, tama, no? Ano bang ginawa niya? So it's an impression.
It's an impression, yeah.
In a
They're
sense,
not
when you
naman
ask people,
they're not
are you
naman asked
approving
to
or
justify their
disapproving of the Vice
impressions, eh.
President? It's really their perception, their impression of what the Vice President has done. If we were the ones to be asked, then we will tally whatever she has done or failed to do.
Yes, sir.
But on the part of the public, to a great significant extent, these national officials are far removed from their daily experience. And eventually, as all vice presidents in the past, with the exception, I think, of Vice President Lenny, because Vice President Lenny was attacked and harassed by the president, most vice presidents really enjoyed higher approval and trust in the president because they're spare tire, they're not being held accountable. The back doesn't stop with them.
Yeah. Prof, what's the story with Senate President Cheese Escudero? Because his numbers mirror that of the president's, no? So recap ko lang, approval niya for March is at 39%. Bumaba from the February number, which was at 47%. And then disapproval niya also rose to 18% from 12% in the previous month. So we're also seeing significant moves in the wrong direction for the Senate President. How do we interpret this?
Well, senators, when they become Senate President, we always see a decline in terms of their approval and trust because they're being held accountable for the institutions. They're either commended or held accountable for the institution's accomplishments or failures. And this is what you see in the case of Senate President Chis Escudero. Maybe the accountability here is with regard to their position with regard to the impeachment case. People who feel that the impeachment case should be given importance would definitely not be approving or trusting of the Senate President. People who feel that the impeachment should be delayed would be basically happy that it has been delayed, and those are the people who might be supportive of, let's say, for example, the Vice President, who is the subject of that impeachment case.
Is it what's the word? Is it usual that he's being seen as a proxy for the president then, or is it normal that his numbers are moving in the same direction as Marcos's?
Yeah, the numbers of the Senate President are more volatile. Sabi nga, remember nating Senate President Enrile, at one point when his performance rating went beyond a majority, his response to a comment, congratulations, sabi niya, parang ice cream yan eh. Madali matunaw. So, yeah, in that sense, it should not be associated with the performance rating of the president, because we're dealing with the question here. We ask people, yung pagganap ng tungkulin bilang presidente, bilang vice-presidente, bilang pangulo ng Senado o presidente ng Senado. We don't know whether people understand what are the functions of the president, vice president, senate president, or the speaker of the house. Baka nga pagkakaintindi ng speaker of the house, tagapagsalita ng pangulo. Which is not too far from reality, no?
Well,
but,
technically hindi
but
dapat, pero
that is not the function of the Speaker of the
Yes.
House, of course. But that's the impression of people. That's the perception that they have. And Senate presidents in the past have always been, for example, Chis Escudero, as senator, enjoyed high performance ratings as senator. But as Senate President, what the ratings that we're seeing right now are basically half of what he enjoyed at the
Yes.
peak, no? Or
Oo.
even less than half of his approval rating as a senator.
Sir, request ko lang.
Professor, balikan ko lang yung tanong ko, no, yun sa election, yung impact sa election. Nakakahawa kaya yung pagbagsak na yan ng approval rating ng presidente sa mga kandidato niya?
Well,
Kasi nung GMA, nung bumabagsak yung yung ratings niya, ang ano sa kanya, kiss of death daw yung niya. Ayaw na nga niya mag-endorse later eh. Kasi baka daw matalo.
well, yun yung mangyayari. Maaaring ma-influensyahan. Pero maraming mga kandidato. Kasi nga, ang problema rito, yung alyansa na ito is an alliance of parties. Nung panahon ni GMA, although alliance siya, tandaan ko ang pangalan ng parang Team Unity ba? Yung kay GMA.
Yes.
Tapos Grand Opposition ba? Yung Grand Alliance. Ayokong buuin kasi may pejorative act nun na ginagamit nun. Di ba? Yung Team Unity, Team Unity of Team Administration at saka yung Grand Alliance of the Genuine Opposition. Don't spell it out. Anyway, I'll spell it out. But those are different arrangements. No? Now it's an alliance of parties. You know? So that means if you belong to the NPC, actually you might be campaigning within the alliance, but you have your own party. And that party has local candidates that can support them in terms of generating support. So in that sense, some candidates are insulated from whatever befalls the national administration or the president. Other candidates will definitely be much more affected. Others are going to be less affected. And right now, you're seeing a change in terms of the strategies of candidates on the part of the administration slate.
But sir, is it also possible na kasi some would say na medyo nagbago yung presentasyon ng dalawang panig in the last month For example, magmula nung the survey was taken 21, di ba? March 21 or 23 thereabouts.
23 to 20.
That was around the time na si VP Sara was giving interviews from The Hague, and her presentation then was of somebody a daughter who was malumanay, mabait, madaling kausap, at nakikihalubilo dun sa mga supporters niya. Versus yung, for example, yung presentation niya late last year.
even this year, after she was impeached.
Oo, yung nakikipag-away siya, the Gurgur thing and the assassination allegations, and yung ipapatapon sa West Philippine Sea and all that. That's on her side. On the other side man, you have Malacanang apparently also changing its tone. Now you have Claire Castro swinging left and right versus before na medyo, di ba, medyo before parang averse to conflict yung presidente. Ngayon, he has a spokesman who's on the warpath with everybody.
Palaban.
Meron bang may epekto kaya yan doon sa mga numbers?
Yeah, yan yung pag-aaralan natin. Kasi yung image na yan, may epekto talaga yan sa pananaw ng publiko. No? Biglang nagbago ang behavior ng vice-presidente. Nabaltaan ko nga kahit doon sa Hong Kong, ang kanyang speech ay kakaiba doon sa pangkaraniwang speech. Hindi siya masyadong parang combative. So on the other hand, as you said, no, and sometimes I watch the presidential communications
Press officer, yeah.
no? Press officer, not spokesperson. Very reactive, no? And in that sense, does it help the administration? So, and that's one area that really has to be studied, no? Because if the vice president has suddenly been a calming presence, and then acting like a concerned daughter, would that draw more sympathy?
And the underdog,
Yeah, so
tapos yan pa their ads that came out this week, si Amy tsaka si Sara, parang lukot-lukot ng mga mukha.
no,
Although wala pa sa survey yun.
Nagluluksa nga.
Nagluluksa yun. Siyempre, hindi mo capture yung survey yun.
hindi ko masabi kung ano may magiging epekto ng pagluluksa. Pero kung kasi dating pag nagluluksa ka, mas nakakakuha ka ng simpatya, no? Kung sa tunay na buhay. Pero sa politika, hindi ko alam kung lalo na sa eleksyon. Maaring may positibo, maaring negatibo epekto. Tingnan natin, lalo-lalo na particular doon sa in-endorse nung nagluluksa.
Sin-endorse. Okay. Okay. Ano, Bok? Meron pa habol?
We're being told, marami pa, but we're being told to wrap. And then, sorry, I guess the pahabol is yung, hindi natin masyado na dissect yung kay House Speaker Martin Romualdez, no? To be fair, he's never rated highly in the approval and trust ratings, right? So this time around, nasa 14% lang siya for approval and 54% for disapproval. Again, he hasn't spoken publicly about the ICC case. As far as we know, he's been silent this whole time. But yun nga, it ties back to what you were saying, that he's being seen as a spokesperson for the president. Ito ba yun?
Not necessarily him, but if you ask people what is the role of a House Speaker, I'm pretty sure that they will say, tagapagsalta. Nino, hindi natin alam. Kasi speaker, di ba? And then, if you track the approval and trust ratings of speakers in the past, there's greater indecision than approval or disapproval. Because remember, the House Speaker represents a district, a small unit. Mm-hmm. But he assumes a national position as Speaker, and his awareness with regard to the Speaker is definitely high within the district. But nationally, hindi ganun kataas. Ang natatandaan ko ng speaker na majority ang approval ay si Speaker Belmonte, but that was at the time, I think, right after Erap's impeachment. Ang isa pang speaker na parang mataas ang approval ay si Alan Peter Cayetano. Pero dala niya kasi, galing siya sa Senado eh. Diba? May national prominence na eh.
Oo.
So, you cannot, and most speakers don't get there's more ambivalence as to whether they're trustworthy or they can appreciate their work, because yun nga, knowledge about the speaker is low because they're district representatives.
May mga issues din of understanding the role. Okay, we'll leave that there. Thank you so much for joining Storycon and for your insights today. Pulse Asia Research President Ronald Holmes.
Thank you, sir.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you.